Investigating solutions to racial disparities and mental health challenges in the Dane County Jail is next on For the Record. I'm Editorial Director Neil Heinen. At the beginning of the year, Dane County Sheriff Dave Mahoney proposed sweeping changes in how Dane County looks at its jail, including a major physical change. In response, the Dane County Board of Supervisors convened 3 work groups to make recommendations to improve our criminal justice system. This is not a totally new initiative. Dane County has been talking about these issues for well over a decade, and it takes place in the context of a national discussion of criminal justice issues that is gaining momentum and provoking change. The county report will further that discussion, and here to talk about the report and its recommendations are Dane County Board Chair Sharon Corrigan and District 23 Supervisor Sheila Stubbs. Supervisors, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks for inviting us.
Sharon, I want to make sure that context was accurate in terms of the thinking of the board and the approach you took to this.
You describe it very well. There were really several tracks kind of parallel going forward. There was the national conversation on race in the criminal justice system. Locally, we have the Race to Equity report talking about the situation in Dane County and the disparities in Dane County. And then we had the discussion about our jail and the conditions in our jail. And the sheriff had raised issues with just the physical plant of the jail and the aging condition of it and the dangers there, but also the issue of mental health conditions in the jail. And so those 3 tracks going forward, we began this conversation in November, I believe it was, and as a board, and the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee had tremendous numbers of people coming to the committee to respond to a number of issues, including the jail, and to talk with the committee about that. Probably more people coming to a committee than I've ever seen, and that many people have been on the board longer than I have ever seen.
Going back to November, they were coming.
Absolutely.
Right, and so as things moved forward, we really we tried to figure out how can we address these issues and get recommendations as to how to move forward. In 2009, Supervisor Stubbs helped lead the work on looking at racial disparities in the criminal justice system, and recommendations came out. But we realized we were at a position, especially looking at the jail, where we needed to figure out how to reduce the number of individuals in the jail and reduce racial disparity in our criminal justice system. So we are members of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. It's a national organization that Dane County is a member of. And one of the things that they teach is that you really have to engage the community in order to have solutions that work for the community. And that's, at that point, we worked with other supervisors, the chair of the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee, Paul Rusk, and Supervisors Baird and Supervisor Leland Pand and Supervisor Jenny Dye, to put together this kind of idea of having these work groups come together. And really, Supervisor Stubbs worked on one of the work groups. I didn't serve on one of the work groups, she did. But I feel like the process was as important as the product for teaching us how to move forward. And I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's really important to talk about how Dane County has been impactful in recognizing the Race to Equity report and how we've been impacting the criminal justice system. You know, it started back in the mid-2000s. There was the 2008 State of Black Madison report before the tipping point, that was released by the Urban League of Greater Madison. That was very important to talk about where African Americans were in the state of Madison, in the state of Wisconsin.
It really predicted.
It was a great predictor.
Exactly what happened.
Absolutely. And I think that the Race to Equity report validated those same issues, but it came from a different voice. And in addition, Dane County, our task force, we put together a task force that was comprised of members of the community, grassroots organizers, service providers, law enforcement, district attorney, you name it. Those very important partners in the criminal justice systems were the makeup of this task force, and it has been the framework that has led us to what we're doing. 80 recommendations came from this group that was so important for us at the county to think about how can we implement these recommendations, and let's look at the cost, and is there any cost that's not involved In addition, we worked on the juvenile system.
Right.
So we had the Disproportionate Minority Confinement Solutions Work Group in 2009, which was very important because it focused on youth ages 12 through 25. And in that recommendation, it was to ban the box. At that time, Dane County recognized that we needed to ban the box on all of our applications. So it was a huge win, and I think that we need to celebrate those really small wins, and that was really important for us. And again, it was a makeup of community.
Do me a favor and explain ban the box for people who might not know what that means.
Sure, it's for an individual that have a criminal offense. And oftentimes before you go any further in the application, it says, have you been convicted of a particular offense? And people select yes.
So on job applications,
Absolutely.
there's actually a box that says, have you been convicted? And
people select that.
Right.
And the unfortunate piece is when that criminal history comes back, oftentimes a person don't get a chance to go further in the application process. So they're not given an interview. And it has prevented us from getting really good people back to work that may have had a bad decision or made a bad decision. So at Dane County, we're saying we're not going to have that as an option on our application. And that was critical for us, and it's a move forward. Target actually decided to do that from a corporation perspective. And so if a large corporation could do it, why can't a government entity do that as well?
you know, you said something I want to ask about, having even going back to November with the public response to these meetings. Is it your impression that this was sort of this was pent-up interest in this, or were you inviting people to come and talk?
I would say it was pent-up interest in it.
That's kind of the impression I got.
We were glad to have people come and be a part of the discussion at committees. I have to say that it was probably more than we've ever seen on any issue, especially at the committee level, coming before on a regular basis. Each meeting of the committee, they would come, and really we realized there was a lot of desire to be a part of the process. And so we brought these groups together, 3 committees, one dealing with mental health in the criminal justice system, one dealing with length of stay, and one dealing with alternatives to incarcerating people. And we brought together people who work in the system, academics who've studied the system, and community members who've been affected by the system, along with 3 just top-notch facilitators that we were able to have and who were a big part of the success of this. The whole groups were, but it was important to have good leadership on that, and who worked together, and they voted and worked to just have consensus around these issues,
Well,
too.
when we come back, I want to talk about what's in this report, and then I hope we get a chance to talk about the Restorative Justice Community Court as well. Because I think that's a big part of it. We'll come back right after this. I am back with Dane County Board Chair Sharon Corrigan and District 23 Supervisor Sheila Stubbs. And we were talking about a report that came out several weeks ago. Dane County Board report, 3 work groups investigating solutions to racial disparities and mental health challenges in the Dane County Jail and throughout Dane County's criminal justice system. And Chair Corrigan, we're not going to go through all 31 recommendations,
Really?
I guess, on this show, as much as I would like to. So give us the highlights. Talk about the recommendations in broad terms, if you could.
Well, I think the first thing that every group discovered as they began meeting on this and examining the issues surrounding racial disparities in the criminal justice system and in the interaction in the mental health system too, was that we don't know a lot of information. They had a lot of questions, and they get back the answer, well, we don't have data on that. And really all the groups came to the conclusion you can't manage what you can't measure. Right. And the overarching recommendation is you have to get a better handle on data, getting your systems to work together better, being able to allow more transparency in what's going on in the system, whether it's at the jail, the courts, or the district attorney's office, or in local government at the police level or at the state level, because all of those systems interact to impact what our jail population looks like. So they recommended that we get the systems working together and that we hire an analyst for data so that we can know what the situation is in better terms, and also be able to know what's working as we implement some of the reforms that we've already begun and some of the ones that we hope to use in the future. So that the...
That's a key, that was one of the key findings here, that we need that before we can move as far forward as we want to.
Absolutely. In fact, and we had said initially that each of the groups should come up with 10 recommendations, 5 that cost money and 5 that are low or no cost. But then we added one overarching recommendation as the groups were meeting, and we realized everybody had this recommendation. We kind of took that one off the table and said, tell us what kind of data you want, and we'll make this the one overarching. So there are actually 31 recommendations that came out of it. So
Supervisor Stubbs, give me some examples that pop out for you of recommendations that you think are particularly important.
Well, I think one that's really important that I'm so proud of is the community restorative court. We talked about expanding this court that is focused on 17 to 25-year-olds that are low risk, and they're called offenders in our community. But when they participate in this program, we call them participants. And looking at this project that was launched 2 years ago in the making, but we actually officially launched it this summer, how can we expand it throughout Dane County and then look at expanding it throughout the state? We have had interest from Milwaukee to contact us and say, what can we do to replicate this? That was one idea that came out. But the other ones that are very simple ideas is diversion programs. How do we expand existing diversion programs, and what are the gaps that are not out there that people are not getting services for? Let's look at that. But the other programs that we looked at is, let's look at the criteria. Because we've created drug court and we think we created a help to one population, but in fact the drug of choices have changed. And so we need to go back and see what's existing that maybe we need to modify, or we need to explain differently, or we need to get different screening. So those are a couple of factors that were common from the alternatives to arrest and incarceration. And in fact, Chair Corrigan said it very well. You know, in Dane County, you cannot manage what you don't measure.
Right.
And so the data piece was critical in our group. We talked about creating a data position, because we need someone whose job is going to be focused on collecting that information so that we can report back on our findings.
Well, and that's one of those recommendations that really appeal to me because of its relevance to providing data. We should see a reduction in the number of young people in CCAP.
Absolutely.
Because of this. I mean, so there, I mean, you can see then the disparities narrow as a direct result of that. Now, it should also build trust, I would think, in the communities, as the relationship between police and communities improve because of that kind of a alternative.
And that would be a wonderful outgrowth of this. And I think we began that process in these groups at the table where people were really hearing each other, you know, having a judge sit at the table with someone who is a representative of the community who's been impacted by the system, and talking to each other and really hearing each other because they've built relationships.
Right.
And the community court is part of that too, of building relationships in the community so that there is that level of trust.
Now, relate this to the discussion that I mentioned in the opening, which is the jail itself. What is the potential long-term impact on our community's need for a facility?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to eliminate the need for a facility. I mean, it would be nice if that were possible, but and maybe in the distant future, but in the foreseeable future, we're going to need some sort of facility. We hope to see a reduction in the need for the facility, but right now, our jail facility, everybody who was in these groups virtually toured the jail facility. The sheriff's been very welcoming and inviting of individuals to come and tour the jail, and I don't know if you've ever had a chance to.
Yeah, several times. And I mean, there's even a part of the jail that's worse than the part of the jail that people don't like.
Right, and it's pretty shocking when you go to tour it and think that we house individuals in here. And the mental health group specifically recommended that we make renovations in the health and safety of the jail, and to look at enabling the sheriff to reduce the use of solitary confinement. It's something that he'd like to be able to do, and get some special needs beds and to be able to do that. And so there were specific recommendations out of especially the mental health group, to say you need to move forward and make the repairs in the jail. It's not a cheap thing to do. I mean, our facility isn't something you can just go in and tack a few repairs onto, and there are deep plumbing issues and just issues of the whole physical plant. And so it's not going to be cheap, but it is an important piece of it is that we have space that is safe and that doesn't exacerbate people's mental health issues or behavior issues when they're in the jail because of the housing conditions in it. So that piece, in fact, the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee is moving forward with a resolution. I believe it's going to be scheduled for next week to move forward on the resolution, trying to begin an estimate of the cost and planning for making those renovations in the jail.
Okay, I want to highlight a few more recommendations, and I want to talk about an opportunity for the public to get involved in this conversation. We'll do that when we come back right after this.
Thanks. Thank you.
And we continue our conversation on Dane County's criminal justice system and the jail and disparities and a lot of the associated issues that were tackled by the Dane County Board and 3 working groups in a report that was issued just recently. And I'm here with Dane County Board Chair Sharon Corrigan and Supervisor Sheila Stubbs. And I want to make sure that both of you get a chance to just highlight other recommendations that we should know about leading into the October 12th public meeting.
Sure. We talked a little bit about, having alternatives to going through the legal system through things like the Community Restorative Court. But I think another piece of the recommendations dealt with looking at the people who work in the system and helping them do their job in a way that makes decisions that are in the interest of the whole community. And there's a lot of discussion about training for individuals who work in the system, learning about your own implicit biases and being able to kind of see that as you make decisions when you work in the system, and teaching people how to look at their decision-making process through a racial equity lens, thinking about who's helped by my decisions, who's hurt by them, who's not at the table when I'm making a decision, and what are unintended consequences. So I think that's really important to train people to help them do a better job. And then when I also talk about...
there are experts out there. There are trainers out there that we will bring in to do this.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I talked about the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. They have, they teach people how to do that. That's part of what they do, is to help train. And there are other trainers out there, too, that can help. And they also talked about, in the groups, about looking at working harder to have our employees in the criminal justice system look like the community too, and to increase the diversity of our employees as we look at hiring in the future. So that's another piece of the puzzle. Is there anything else you wanted?
Well, absolutely. Those were 3 common themes all of the groups certainly looked at. But I think another piece was, how do we get community to continue to stay engaged? So an advisory group composition is very critical. That our group talked about the alternatives to arrest and incarceration. And what was important is to give community leverage. Community wanted to be given a say. So I think it's very important that as we decide to put an advisory group together, that we think about what is going to be their authority. Because you don't want to mislead community in any way, but you want their input to be input that's actionary and implementable. So that was one of the conversations that was very loud and clear from the beginning of the group. It's, I'm so glad to be a part of this process, but now what?
Well, and isn't this a connection with the African American Leadership Council, the Justified Anger, Young Gifted and Black, groups that could participate in this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's so important to think about those that have been a part of our process from the mid-2000s. They sat through these groups for a year or 2 years, working on recommendations. What's more important, if they've given us 80 recommendations, why can't we implement them? It will take time, but I think it's critical that we don't want community to feel as if though we've wasted their time. And so we need to listen. And I think this process was very important, that myself as a supervisor listen to those that were at the table and then go back and try and understand their perspective. And then let's make sure that they have a voice and a say. So that was very critical for us. And I think our work group got along very well. And at the end of the day, we all were able to put our recommendations through. And it was 10. Only 10.
October 12th, who do you want to see there?
We'd like to see
Sharon?
a broad spectrum of individuals in the community come to our meeting. It's a community conversation. It's somewhat closing the loop on this, not that it's the end of the process, it's really the beginning of us implementing things. But we've invited individuals to come and hear about these recommendations. It's at the Alliant Energy Center at 6 o'clock at the community conversation on these work group recommendations. We'd like to see people who are interested in this issue in general, people who have been, their families or they themselves have been impacted by the system, people who work in the system. We'd like to invite them all to be a part of it. And we really want people to come and sit at tables with people that they don't know, too. It's an important part of this process is hearing people who are different from you talk about their reactions to the reports. It's going to be a reporting out, but also a conversation at tables, so that everybody has a chance to weigh in on that.
Yeah. Now, referencing 15 years of work on this, Sheila, are you seeing a change in momentum when we talk about the national conversation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what's really important is to recognize leadership. I certainly applaud County Board Chair Sharon Corrigan and our county executive because they have been leaders. The county executive has worked with staff from the department and say, this is critical work. We're going to look at every strategic plan. We want everyone to put one together from airport to zoo. Our leadership, certainly every time we get a chance, she and I stand at podiums very often, and we're always doing an actionary piece. And so I've always said, let's talk more action. The community is looking for action. We are policy writers. We can write policy. And you know, Neil, we're in this problem because it's systemic. It's just been our systems, it's been our practices, our policies, our trainings, and so it's going to take time to undo some of these factors, but most important, it's going to take change. And change isn't easy, but change is necessary. But it's engaging collaborations and partnerships with the city and other community organizations in order to be at the same point that we can move forward a new agenda. So it's a new day at Dane County. And I'm proud to stand here and say that I feel we're moving forward.
We have 30 seconds, Sharon. There will be another report at some point with the recommendations that come out of this.
Our plan is to begin this year in the budget process. We are now
in the current budget process.
We just received the county executive's recommendations that came to the board at the beginning
of
October. And this came out late in September. It really wasn't part of his budget process, but he left room in the budget so that we can implement some of these items. And so we're looking forward to that.
Thank you both very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We're going to wrap up For the Record right after this. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next Sunday on For the Record.